Pan-Africanism that would bring about unification of all of Africa into a United States of Africa. But this dream can only be possible after spiritual balance, social regeneration, economic determinism, and mental emancipation have been achieved, preferably in that order.
However, Zik's success with the Post also brought him trouble. An article by ITA Wallace Johnson titled "Has the African a God?" published by the Post on May 15, 1936, was found by the colonial masters to be seditious. Zik was arrested, tried, and convicted, but he won his appeal. This development punctuated his honeymoon because barely a month earlier, on April 4, 1936, he had married Flora Ogbenyealu in Wesley Church, Jamestown, Accra in Ghana. Zik's agitation for the liberation of the black man helped in the numerous forces of inspiration that geared the future first president of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, towards liberating his country, Ghana, from the reins of colonial rule.
On March 6, 1957, Kwame Nkrumah led the British West African colony of the Gold Coast to independence as the nation of Ghana. The jubilant independence ceremonies and Nkrumah's inauguration as Prime Minister were attended by political figures from around the world. Ghana was the first black African nation to gain independence. Its achievement inspired independence movements across Africa in the years that followed.
Long live the father, Thank you, Africans. This is going to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing the world. Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!
Nkrumah and Zik had both attended the Lincoln University and were both members of the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. In 1937, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe returned to Nigeria and floated a limited liability company to begin the publication of the West African Pilot.
In journalism, for Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe was an astute journalist. He advocated for journalism that is accurately aware of who did what, where, when, why, and how. The first issue, which appeared in Nigeria in the west coast of Africa on November 22, 1937, with its fire-eating publish and be damned editorials, the steering technique and rhetoric of the inside stuff written by Zik himself, and its trenchant attacks on colonization and the colonial masters. The West African Pilot was like a sunrise appearing in the gloom that had beclouded the Nigerian political and journalistic horizon, especially in the early 1930s. As Zik's long-term associate, Otumba Adeniran Ogusanya, described it in Vanguard of May 15, 1996. He said, and I quote, "The pilot was like a dagger pointing at the heart of colonial rulers. None had ever dared the whites that far, and none had so adroitly avoided the myriad of traps set for the young Zik. Civil servants had to read the pilot secretly and with great trepidation." Unquote. Altogether, Zik established the following newspapers in the Zik Press Group: The West African Pilot, Lagos, 1937; Eastern Nigerian Garden, 1940; Nigerian Spokesman, Onitsha, 1943; Southern Nigerian Defender, Ibadan, 1943; and Sentinel, Enugu. It is important to note at this point that Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, on his return to Africa in 1934, was to influence a band of youths to depart for the United States in quest of the Golden Fleece. The first was the late Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. In 1938, 9 others joined him at Lincoln University, Zik's alma mater, including Orizu. Mbadiwe, Mbono Jike, Okala, Disu, and others. As the pilot elevated the anti-colonial struggle to the level of a national agenda, Zik joined the Nigerian youth movement, NYM.
I introduced the idea of one Nigeria, one Nigeria. And what happened was that in 1938, I was explaining earlier on, it was the Lagos youth movement. So I appealed to my colleagues that Lagos was all right. Yes, Lagos is the capital of Nigeria, and Lagos also is the homeland of many multilingual groups in Nigeria. So that Lagos youth movement was all right. But what we wanted was to create a state of nationalism. So we could change it from Lagos youth movement to Nigerian youth movement. We agreed.
And after a period of political activity and a crisis in NYM, he left it and collaborated with Herbert Macaulay, the grandson of Bishop Ajayi Crowther, to found the National Council of Nigeria and Cameroon's NCNC in 1944. Dr. Herbert Macaulay was a gifted orator, and he consistently challenged the colonial administration over local issues in Lagos. By the 1930s, his stance was to pave the way for a new nationalist movement, the Lagos Youth Movement, which, as we have seen, was consciously changed to Nigeria Youth Movement by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, was the first of such movements to demand self-determination.
On June 10, 1944, the Nigerian Union of Students decided to form the National Council of Nigeria. Herbert Macaulay was elected president and Nnamdi Azikiwe was elected the secretary. By January 1945, the National Council changed its name to National Council of Nigeria and Cameroon, NCNC. When Herbert Macaulay died in 1946, Azikiwe was elected the president of the party. The NCNC was the only viable political organization in the country up until 1951. Resentment from people of other tribes about fears of Igbo domination punctured the progress of the NCNC. As the prime vanguard of the struggle for Nigerians' independence, with the founding of AG and the MPC, NCNC became identified, whether by omission or commission, with the Igbo.
By the 1940s, there was still little communication between educated Nigerians and the colonial government. To the British, seeking out friendship with the Nigerians was considered unsound behavior. Nigerians worked daily alongside the British, but that did not stop them from being banned from clubs and bars, a practice that continued up until the 1950s. The British had problems relating with the very people they claimed they have educated to such a high standard. World War II was to change attitudes. Many Nigerians fought alongside people from other nations. They experienced the egalitarian influence of war. They absorbed the language of freedom and justice used to fight the operational dictatorship. At home and abroad, Nigerian soldiers served as equals together with the Europeans. Barriers had broken down under the stress of conflict. After the war, it will be hard to accept the old divisions. A new set of horizons opened, one that included an independent Nigeria.
So we felt that we were not saying something that was true. It was consistent with the announced policy of the Allied powers that all people are entitled to the right of self-determination. But when we were denied such right, we said no, it couldn't be a government headed by Nnamdi Azikiwe, because he was present with Rizzo and Stalin when the Atlantic Tower was prepared. So on that basis, we prepared a blueprint for 15 years to make it become to hand over to us over a period of 15 years. It was decided that we wanted an organization to keep the national as an outlook, and we should emphasize one country.
The colonial indifference to Nigerian needs was made clear in 1944 when the Governor-General, Sir Otto Richards, proposed the new constitution which will be enacted 3 years later. Although